So we're going to talk about growth this morning in this panel, and that covers a number of areas, but one that's dear to my heart is renewable energy. And our first speaker is Arya Green, who's Chief Strategy Officer of Gigawatt Global. Arya pointed out to me that his resume on the program talks a lot about his personal experience, which is fascinating, and we chatted about last night, but we need to talk a little bit about his company as well, Gigawatt Global. And I know he's going to make some interesting announcements about their new projects. I'll just say on a personal note, Arya, the first time I came across your company before you and I met was about 5 years ago when I was at a conference when the Rwanda project had just reached financial close and was described. And we've never seen financiers so excited about how fast a project could reach financial close in a challenging environment. So we know that you are not just talk, but also action, and I'll welcome you to the stage.
Well, thank you very much, Jonathan. And I don't want any of us to feel older than we really are, but that was probably more like 10 years ago, or 7. We built the field in 2014, so financial close would have been 18 months prior. But yes, our experience in Rwanda was phenomenal. And because everybody, both in this forum this morning here physically, and thank you for getting up early enough, as Jonathan said, after a late night last night, and for all of you joining us online, certainly welcome everybody whose focus is on investing in Africa. And therefore, there's a lot of familiarity with the challenges of investing in Africa. And therefore, yes, we were very proud and pleased with how fast we were able to both reach financial close and then finish construction in Rwanda. And yes, you kind of gave a hint about an upcoming announcement. So Gigawatt Global, our team has built 16 fields around the world in the last 15, 17 years. In Africa, Gigawatt Global has built the first field in Rwanda, and I'm pleased to share with you this morning that in about 10 days, we'll be announcing the completion and the operation of our second field in Africa, this one in Burundi. Now, it's been operational since April, but in the interim time, and feeding electricity into the grid with a contribution of more than 10% of the country of Burundi's generating capacity. And we're going to talk a little bit about the impact of this sort of jump in generating capacity for African nations, developing nations. But just as an aside, or perhaps not an aside, there's no question that we were proud of the proof of concept that a Dutch company with a bunch of American and Israeli entrepreneurs with experience in solar energy and infrastructure were able to build in 2014 a field in sub-Saharan Africa, the first commercial scale, utility scale field in sub-Saharan Africa, and the first project on the rubric, by the way, of the US government's, USAID's Power Africa program as well, of which Gigawatt Global is a founding partner. But that proof of concept, because we're familiar with the situation of different economies and political situations and circumstances in Africa, in Rwanda was, let's just say, not necessarily easy, but easier than other markets in Africa, because Rwanda is, as we can recognize, a relatively stable economic and political environment. Burundi, with great love and affection and respect for the people of Burundi and the government of Burundi, with which we have worked closely over the last 6 years, Burundi is not Rwanda. Burundi is, unfortunately, a very, very dysfunctional state, and unfortunately one of the poorest nations on the planet. And therefore, if Rwanda was our proof of concept for Gigawatt Global, then Burundi really is our proof of our ability to replicate. And if we can build in Burundi, I would say we can build almost anywhere. But we're here to talk here, and thank you, Jonathan, because we're not really here to talk about Gigawatt Global. Clearly, I'll be delighted to speak more about Gigawatt Global in the questions and answers time that we'll have or afterwards. But we're here to talk about how we can move the needle from all the talk about renewables to action about renewables. And I was delighted to be invited to discuss that with you this morning because it is, let's just say, something of a pet peeve that I and we in Gigawatt Global and we in the world of developing renewable energy projects, solar, wind, or otherwise, especially in developing nations like Africa, have a certain amount of frustration with. And in fact, I'm going to get out from behind the lectern because I hate that. If you don't mind, for giving my back to you, Jonathan. So we all talk about improving the situation for access to electricity, especially in Africa and developing nations. But there's not enough that's really being done. And I said it's a pet peeve because we suffer from this in our efforts to raise investment funds for our parent company. I'm not talking about the projects themselves. Everybody wants to get into these projects in Africa and renewable energy because they are backed by World Bank or MIGA or other political risk insurance guarantees, commercial guarantees, currency fluctuation guarantees, and what have you. So they're relatively secure investments. But it took us almost 6 years to bring Burundi to fruition after we built Rwanda. We've been working on a project in Nigeria for 7 years. Our team in South Sudan have been working on the project there for 4.5 years. And as a developer, we carry the responsibility, the burden of providing the funds necessary to move these projects ahead from initiation through the pre-development process to reaching the point where those financial partners, sovereign wealth funds, private equity firms, development banks, impact investment groups, foundations who are looking to invest with their endowments, actually can put their money into a project. And this is a frustration that's felt across the board. A certain East African country announced 8.5 years ago a presidential priority project to bring solar energy to their country. 8.5 years later, not a single thing has been done to make that happen. Now, obviously, we're talking about roadblocks in bureaucracies. We're talking about, unfortunately, of course, there's an element of corruption involved and inefficiencies within the context of a lot of different governments, but we're also talking about a reticence on the part of the financial community to put their money where their mouth is. And to a certain extent, that's what we're here to talk about today. I want you to look at the figure here. If you compare the bottom figure of 514 kilowatt hours per capita in sub-Saharan Africa today to the United States, which is almost 14,000 kilowatt hours per capita of energy consumption. The gap here is tremendous. And everybody talks about it. We have to bring more electricity to Africa. Fewer people talk about the cost of the lack of access to electricity. In Africa, there are 600 million people who have no access to electricity. And here we're talking about refrigeration of medicines. We're talking about waste management, purification of water, or just bringing clean water out of the ground, disease prevention, solutions to food scarcity and malnutrition. We're talking about life and death. The World Health Organization suggests that 6 million people die in Africa every year because of a lack of access to electricity. I'm not talking, people die all the time, but we're talking about preventable deaths, let alone the suffering that comes with malnutrition or disease or dehydration or what have you. The human development elements of electricity access are inarguable. But here, this is a conference about investing in Africa. Yes, we want to make impact. Yes, we want to help change the world. Yes, we want to help combat climate change. We're having this conversation a few weeks before the United Kingdom hosts COP26, where the world's leaders talk a lot about how we have to combat climate change. And yet here we're looking at investments, and it's important to recognize that as much as we want to achieve our humanitarian goals and promote the economic development of African communities, and of course we want to help to combat climate change with renewable energy, the fact is that the opportunity for successful investment, by which I mean profiting, which is not a dirty word within the investment community, the opportunities in renewable energy, especially in Africa, are phenomenal. And there's a few reasons for that, which I'm happy to get into later if you'd like, in terms of the cost of transportation, for instance, of dirty diesel, on which many, if not most, African economies rely. The cost of transportation, just distribution of diesel fuel makes solar and wind and other renewables more economical. There's no need for subsidies like in America or Europe. It's actually cheaper to produce and provide renewable energy in Africa. And you can see from some of these figures that the growth of renewables around the world, which focuses to a certain extent on Africa, is going to be very robust in the next few years, including, of course, wind. If you look at the other, which may not rise or blow as strong as wind opportunities in say, India or China, but it still is growing and providing amazing investment opportunities. We believe in doing well by doing good. As a private company, we believe in providing returns to our investors, while at the same time helping to promote those humanitarian or economic or climate-related goals. But here's the issue. There are ways this can be done which are not being exploited sufficiently by the international financial community. Before I go into each one with a little bit more detail, I just want to say, as a caveat, we all recognize that the international community, led by the World Bank and others, the UN, have put in place mechanisms to mitigate the risks of investing in Africa in renewables. But the challenge is that too few of the world's leading investment groups are either aware or have reached a comfort level to go ahead and act on these mechanisms and pursue these opportunities. So I want to suggest a few practical approaches that we all, whether you're a private equity fund or an impact investing firm or a foundation with an asset base where you could dedicate some of those assets instead of investing in traditional approaches of investing in renewables or in impact or in Africa, or whether you're a conglomerate or an energy company, there are various different mechanisms that we could all pursue, some of which are already being pursued, which I'm happy to recognize. The first idea is a revolving fund, where basically funds would be put into projects or a company like ours, developers, to help bring those projects faster to financial close. The returns then could be immediately realized from the developer fees and then plowed into the next project, which is why it's a revolving fund and not simply a long-term holding fund. One idea that we pursued with a number of different prospects, which I'd be delighted to discuss with any of you who might be interested, are some sort of a joint venture co-development relationship where a fund or company or foundation with money partners with, for instance, a developer like Gigawatt Global, with a robust pipeline of over 20 projects under development, of which 12 are in advanced stages of development. In South Sudan, in Kenya, in Ethiopia, and Zambia, where we have our first wind and solar hybrid project, in Nigeria, and Liberia, and Guinea, and Mozambique. This kind of company, like Gigawatt Global, and there are others, is able to bring these projects to financial close, to the point where they're ready to be invested in, if they have the resources to put people on planes, to pay the salaries of our project developers, to fund the grid studies and the environmental and social impact studies and the like. So a co-development relationship is something that could be and should be pursued, especially by a fund or a company that has the money and no pipeline, but is interested in taking a slightly higher risk than putting money into the project itself, but putting money into the pre-dev and the development process of the project. A third idea is a renewable energy program within a fund or within a foundation, which would then provide the kind of equity or debt for the projects, and to a great extent, like investing in a fund itself, they could do that with direct investments, diversifying their risk by investing in different projects. Another idea, which certainly has a place within the financial community, which some are already pursuing, like guarantor, loan guarantees, in order to help promote the investment community to make the kind of loans that are necessary to move these projects forward. Sovereign guarantees are critical For some of those markets, we happen to have a number of projects in the Palestinian Authority. Our headquarters is in Jerusalem, so it's kind of a good neighborly type of approach to our business because our focus really is on Africa. But the Palestinian Authority doesn't have the ability to provide the kind of security that we look for when building larger projects. Junior loans, mezzanine loans, you can look at, of course, there are a lot of you in the room here. I've discussed with some of you the idea of different kinds of senior or junior or mezzanine loans, but more can be provided, more should be made available. Grants for the initial stages of project development are critical. I don't think we would have gone as fast or been as successful in Rwanda if we didn't get $1 million grant to cover the cost of the initial pre-development work. Because who is going to take the first step of investing in a project which has not yet had a feasibility study, a grid study, an environmental and social impact study, and the like, a license to operate, or the heads of terms for a PPA, a power purchase agreement? Another idea that I'm throwing out is if the feed-in tariff can't justify a financial model for the project which attracts investors, then there could be out there somewhere, whether it's a foundation making it a grant or an investment company that's looking for lower returns on their equity. The kind of project returns that we look to achieve and have achieved in Africa are somewhere in the low to mid-teens. But there are funds out there looking for 5 to 8% returns. They don't need the 11%, 12, 13% returns. And therefore, if they can commit that they'll take the first 5% and then they'll split 50-50, whatever's beyond that, then other equity partners, including Gigawatt Global, where we want to put our own financial equity into projects, can be more successful in reaching financial close faster. Green bonds are something that have already obviously been launched and you're familiar with. But those are 9 specific approaches. Some of them more innovative, some of them already being introduced to the market in the last 5 years, but all of which, if pursued, would accelerate tremendously the ability of the investment community to really assertively move faster with investment in renewables in Africa. Now, just as one example, because this is something we put into place, and I'm very proud that we helped to inaugurate ATI's Regional Liquidity Support Facility for our Burundi project, which, as this slide describes in more detail, helps to cover the risk involved with investing in a project in a country like Burundi, of which there are unfortunately others in Africa and elsewhere in the developing world where investors are less confident in the ability of a project to actually commercially be successful. And this is the kind of innovative tool that I'm talking about. When we talk about moving from talk to action in renewables for Africa, we're talking about a company like ATI, backed by KfW and BMZ, who looked for a way to make it more possible and more attractive for an investment partner like Inspired Evolution, which is the private equity fund from South Africa, backed by FMO, the Dutch Development Bank, and Sweet Fund and others, it made it more attractive for them to say, hey, we're going to do this, and not just do it. They chose to do an all-equity deal, which was one of the reasons we were able also to reach financial close faster than the usual months of negotiation with your debtor or equity partners. I want to close with a very, very important reference. Because often when we talk about renewables, and here we are in the UK, I mentioned COP26, and the Western world, America, Europe, and what have you, are very enthusiastic about promoting renewable energy to save the planet. But I want to talk about the fact that impact investing in general and renewables specifically are profitable investment opportunities. And don't believe me, go to the link here. This presentation will be on the website. The BlackRock report, which I've just summarized here in a few bullet points, demonstrates conclusively that there's no longer a trade-off like there was 10 or 20 years ago when impact investing started to be introduced and financial managers had to say, well, either I can get you X kind of returns, or you'll have to sacrifice some of those returns in order to make the impact you want to make. Women's empowerment, promoting health, renewable energy and fighting climate change, etc. Today, the numbers prove the point. You can make money while making an impact. You can do well by doing good. Now, I'm going to stop here because the focus here has been throwing out these ideas of how we can promote more renewable investment, renewable energy. But I would like, if I have an extra 2 minutes, because I think we had 20, we started a little bit late. Can we run that video, perhaps, that we were looking at before? I'm just going to show 20 seconds of a video, and the reason it's exciting is our project in Burundi, which I mentioned has been up and running already. We're announcing, and go ahead and run the film. We're announcing the completion and operation of the project on October 25th before COP26. And I just want you to share with me not only how beautiful it is, but how impressive it is that a Western company partnering with the Development Finance Corporation, with the Renewable Energy Performance Platform here in the UK, partnering with BIO from Belgium, partnering with our various partners, including the Dutch Development Bank. We can stop running it, thank you. FMO and others, successfully built a 7.5 megawatt field in one of the poorest nations on the planet. And although it took 5.5, 6 years, it's up and running. It's providing more than 10% of the country's electricity today. And I just want to end by reminding us of what we're talking about. Not just the midterm returns on the projects, not just the IRR that Gigawatt Global should be able to provide according to our financial projections of well above 15% for our institutional investors who come in on the round that we're now looking to raise of somewhere between $25 to $50 million to enable us to accelerate the development of our pipeline of projects, to enable us to put financial equity, project finance into, capital into the projects. But also what it means aside from that bottom line of the financial bottom line. 6 million people, I want to repeat, die every year who don't have to in Africa. And access to electricity, including grid connected. There's another session later about leapfrogging. When is the grid going to be obsolete? 20, 30 years, yes. Off-grid, mini-grids, et cetera, as one of the first slides said. Yes, there's tremendous things being done, especially by the nonprofit world on the off-grid, mini-grid sector. Unfortunately, nobody has quite figured out a way to make real returns on the business side of doing mini-grids, but still, it's an important contribution. But it's not going to resolve this issue over the next 5 to 10 years of the 600 million people who don't have access to electricity. And grid-connected electricity can contribute phenomenally. If we can build 5, 10 grid-connected projects over the next 2 or 3 years, which we, all of us, not just Gigawatt Global, can do, we can increase the generating capacity and provide the economic development opportunities. We can provide the refrigeration for medicines, hospitalization operations in order to save lives. We can provide the electricity needed for waste management facilities. We can provide the electricity needed to pump clean water out of the ground. We can save lives and make money doing so. Thank you for your attention, and please join with me in committing to do what we can to move that needle now, not in 4 years, not in 10 years, not politicians talking about, oh, we have to do this, but doing it now by making the investments now in order to make a real impact and make some money along the way. Thank you very much. If we have time, you can take a...
Any questions for Arya?
I'm always happy with a little bit of quiet. We can wait for a second. Yes?
I'm Marina from FMO, so thanks for mentioning our...
Thank you for your support of both of our projects now, and hopefully others.
I have a question. How do you see the role of the governments? And I know you don't have talking with politicians and so forth, but at the same time we do need to develop projects that meet the goals.
Marina, that's a brilliant question. I'll just repeat it for those who perhaps didn't hear or online. What's the role of governments, Marina from FMO, the Dutch Development Bank, is asking, within the process of encouraging more investment? And I'm going to give you an answer which is both self-serving, in terms of Gigawatt Global's needs, but also from my observations over the last decade of working in the financial business side of renewables. I believe it's true across the board. One of the challenges we all face is that the mandates that governments give to their development banks or to the private or semi-private government operations that are created, for instance, GlobalEC, created by the CDC, which invests in projects. The mandates are too narrowly defined. let's admit, everybody sitting here is in the financial sector. This is a conservative community. It's not a risk-taking community. That's true for the heads of development banks, private equity funds, foundations, whatever it is. They're not a risk-taking population. And so when the mandates are narrow, when the mandate for a development bank or a private equity fund that's funded by a development bank is invest in projects, they say to me all the time, well, we'd love to put $25 million upstairs in your company to help you build out the dozen projects that are at advanced stages of development in your pipeline. We love what you're doing in all the countries I mentioned, but we can't do that. Our mandate is to invest in projects, not in developers or parent companies or holdcos or platforms. So my first answer is, let's be together a bit more creative. Let's take a slightly greater risk in helping to fund the pre-dev costs, to lead the projects to the financial close situation where then these government-backed funds can invest in the projects themselves. That would be one example. The second example, I'll go back to one of the things that I suggested here, which is a revolving fund. Because governments have the kind of resources that they could create. I'm going to use an example, but without naming them. There's a fund that was funded by the EU with $100 million 5 years ago, 5 guys sitting in Luxembourg. Good people, financial people. Their mandate is to invest in renewable energy projects in Africa. We had a dozen conversations. They have yet to invest any money. They have yet to invest any money. They were given another $100 million by the EU. They have yet to invest in any specific project. That's what we're facing. And so if they were to say, you know what, we have $200 million, we're not going to take a big risk. This isn't high tech. This isn't looking for a unicorn that's going to bring kind of returns, VC returns for a startup. But we're going to take 5% of those funds, $10 million, and we're going to help a few companies, not just a gigawatt, a few companies bring the projects they have under development to the financial close. And then we're going to take that money and put it back into others. And even if we're going to delineate, we want you to pursue your project in Kenya, South Sudan, Liberia, and Zambia. I'm not interested in Mozambique. I'm not interested in Nigeria or Conakry. Fine. Those kind of relationships are possible, but the problem with governments is they're slow-moving, and they're cumbersome, and they're too conservative. And so my suggestion for governments is, we had an opening talk here from the Minister for Development. I don't remember the woman who gave a recorded video talk at the very beginning of the conference. Politicians are very good at making announcements and pronouncements, and I have great respect for politicians who are able then to move beyond that and actually allocate budgets and see things to fruition and get things done. And my suggestion for governments, and especially government-backed development banks, is to break out of the financial straits of the looking at the financial returns only, and that they have to be secured, but to be more creative, to create the kind of mechanisms that we're talking about here. And thank you, Marina, for the question. Let's talk more afterwards. Any other questions? I'm obviously happy to stay behind a little bit, and I think the next conversation that's going to be here on the panel is going to be actually very, very relevant to what we're talking about promoting the growth of infrastructure and the societies of Africa.
One more question here.
Hi.
Yeah, sorry.
So you asked, the question was about what can governments do, what can commercial banks do? Because everything you're saying suggests it's still some way before the commercial banks can get involved. So can you help me there?
How can commercial banks be more successful? Again, we're all from the financial and business community. If you imagine, I don't care where we are, certainly America, Europe, Japan, or elsewhere in the developing world, a small company in a small town wants to start a business. Fellow has an idea, has some experience in whatever that business area might be, but he needs a bit of capital in order to scale. He goes to his local bank and he says, I have an idea, here's my business plan. Can you loan me X amount of money, or can you invest X amount of money? Or he'll go to his family and friends, let alone, here we're talking about commercial banks. What happens there? The commercial bank in the local community looks at this person, looks at their record, and takes a leap of faith. Not a great risk. Again, I like to compare it to high tech because I was in high tech. I've lived in Israel for 35 years. Most of my business experience is in high tech. You look at the VC and the startup funding community, and they'll put millions of dollars into ideas with a piece of software with no background, no relevant proof of the concept. Here we're talking about in a local community, a banker looks at an individual, a man or a woman, and says, I like the plan, I see you have experience, I'm going to invest. I'm going to take a risk. Not a tremendous risk, like in a startup for a high tech, but I'm going to take a risk. And that's my answer to the commercial banking community. The commercial banks are also way too conservative, again, without mentioning names. I have a wonderful relationship with somebody who became a friend after meeting him at the Milken Conference about 5 years ago, who leads an investment fund managing $3 trillion, excuse me, I always get confused with this, managing $3 billion, billion, that's my mistake. The name of the company is confusing. Managing $3 billion in assets. And I said to him, so, and he loves what we're doing, and he wants to get into our projects. And I said, so put in 10, 15, $25 million out of your $2 billion that you put into traditional industries and investments and help us get there. Can't do it because his mandate is too narrow. And that's the problem, like with the governments, with the commercial banks. And by the record, just while I'm on a roll, the same with the foundation community. Now, I love the fact that IKEA and Rockefeller just announced a $1 billion renewable energy initiative. Where is their money going to go? Into secured projects when those projects are available for funding. This goes back, obviously, to my main argument. Or into technologies to help with the renewable energy world, which is also great and important. But the problem is that they're not doing enough to enable the projects that we're talking about to go to fruition. So whether it's foundations using their endowment assets in impact investing, and they all need to put more into impact, and particularly to renewables, or whether it's taking a leap of faith as a commercial bank into a proven team with a proven business model, with proven experience, who just need a little bit more support to move ahead with their projects, or whether it's governments taking a little bit more, offering a little bit more flexibility to the mechanisms that they're creating, or the creation of new mechanisms. There's a lot that all of these sectors can do, I think, to accelerate the adoption and the creation of renewable energy in Africa. So we end there. Thank you for the question.